Good morning, everybody. This is BIM management and delivery for airports. I've got three panelists with me to talk about, well, BIM management and delivery for airports. I've got Mark Hughes, who is a BIM manager from AECOM, Brendan Dillon, who is the BIM manager for Denver International Airport, and Josh Taylor, who is a senior integrated construction manager or coordinator. One of those construction terms for the same thing. For Mortensen Construction. We all worked together on...
Who are you?
Oh, Will Lineberry. I'm the Design Technology Director. What am I? The reason I'm hesitant on all this is we've all recently changed positions. We all worked together on the Denver International Airport Hotel and Transit Center project, which is a big 500-room Westin hotel and train station attached to the airport. You've probably seen it in some Autodesk marketing materials. It was highlighted in the Infrastructure Symposium, and it won the Infrastructure Excellence Award last year. So that's how we all know each other. We work together. We've, like I said, recently changed positions a little bit. Brendan originally was on the design team. He worked for Iron Horse Architects on the design side, so he's going to be speaking from that capacity, even though now, technically, he's the owner side. Josh is on the contractor side, and he's going to speak from that position. Mark is owner's rep for AECOM, working for the airport, so he's going to speak for the owner's side from this presentation. So the way we're going to handle this is we've got 4 different stakeholders, and everybody has kind of different interests in implementing BIM specifically for an airport. Everybody has a little bit different perspective, so we're going to try and give you a little view from each one of us and how they overlap and where they might conflict. With that, there's the class summary.
I might not want to stand there.
No, I think I'm going to move over
Yeah.
away from
You blocking the...
Now it's
So
back to this.
4 different perspectives, and we're going to address this from 6 different questions. So what do you want from each perspective? So if you had your perfect world and you were, say, a contractor and you were going to be implementing BIM on an airport project, what is your best perspective? Same thing for what is possible, carte blanche, if you could do anything, what's out there, what's realistic for a specific project. We're going to be kind of looking at this around the Denver International Airport Hotel and Transit Center project, but also other projects as well. And then we're going to go through how is it implemented, so how do you actually go through and do all this stuff? How is it managed to ensure that you have the right outcome? And then finally, how do you roll it up and hand it over to the owner, who in this case is Mark, but is really now Brendan, in case you're paying attention.
Your scorecard's outside, I think. People
Yes.
keep it straight.
All right, so leave your perceived industry standard at the door. If you've seen one airport, you have seen one airport. There is no industry standard for an airport BIM implementation. Everybody's in the middle of doing something, and each one is a little bit different right now. LAX, SFO, LaGuardia, they've all got big programs going on in which they're leveraging BIM to various degrees, and they are all taking slightly different tacks, from basic standards to full-on asset management, integration, and lifecycle. Now, I'm going to hand it over to Mark, who is going to represent the owner in our little discussion here.
Yeah, so looking at it from an owner's perspective, and we're going to talk about Denver International Airport here, understanding what they have now, they have 9 million CAD files representing 20 years of development through different capital improvement and O&M projects. What did they want? We wanted a clean, concise set of documents that showed our point in time. How do we do that? What are my end uses? Where am I looking to go with this? I have, as the owner, multiple uses in mind for this content. I've got GIS deliverables I have to make to the FAA. I've got asset information management that I need to hand over to my maintenance teams. I've got project information or program information management that we're pulling together to help develop content. And then we're doing civil infrastructure modeling and building information modeling for our design side, and then ultimately VD&C. We have all these uses as an owner looking forward. We aren't just saying, okay, just go build me something. There are needs that come out of all of this information that's created during a development process.
Well, let's not forget satisfying the city auditor.
Satisfying the city auditor is one of those. What do you need? Well, this is an interesting depiction of where most large owners are today. They focus a lot on cutting back the dollars and the flow of money on the development side. In the meantime, behind them, they're bleeding money out through the asset management side. Focus has changed at Denver International Airport. It's 20 years old. It's getting to that point where the aches and creaks are starting to set in, and realizing we're not new anymore. We better take a look at our asset management. So the BIM implementation actually falls under the asset management group within Denver International Airport. So our need is to control the flow of money out of our asset management side. What else do we want? We wanted all the stakeholders engaged in the process at the airport. We did an interesting discussion with the airport and found that depending on which department we went to, there were no less than 37 critical systems that needed to be maintained and modified and or updated. Can't have 37 critical systems in a large organization. So our goal is to get all stakeholders involved and have them realize the importance of the other critical systems and start to weigh information on that level. So stakeholder engagement was very important.
So from a program management perspective, and that was my role on the Denver project. I worked for the program management team as overall BIM management. From a purely selfish view, what do we want? We want to save the program time and money, right? So as efficiently and as effectively as everything can be implemented and run, that's the end goal. We, of course, want to meet the owner's requirements, and the owner's requirements, again, are going to vary from airport to airport. Denver is in the middle of an incredibly ambitious BIM implementation airport-wide, so they had a very specific set of standards and processes that needed to be vetted through this process, through this program that we were doing. So our charge was to set up standards or help set up standards, put together processes, document everything, an execution plan, and so on, and ensure that through design, construction, and then into handover, everything goes smoothly and can roll into the owner's specific requirements, including tied to their asset management database. An important part of that is clear scope definition. So if you go in and you don't know what you're supposed to be doing, anything can happen. It's very important to get in on the front end and know exactly what's going to be coming down the line. And if not, at least how to handle things when they come up, as they invariably do. What we don't want, change orders. No offense to my contractor friend over there.
We don't want them either.
If you can see the little dinghy attached, says original contract. You've probably all seen that. Yeah.
So from the design side, what we really want ultimately at the end of the day is a happy client. We want a client who's going to come to us for more work and recommend us to other clients for more work. You do that by, in this case, delivering a fully coordinated design model. What does fully coordinated mean? Well, most of the time it's not actually going to mean zero clashes, because zero clashes aren't fully feasible.
From here.
So we need to find out where the client's values are on that fully coordinated design model. You want an efficient design and documentation. The BIM process really does improve that efficiency, at least on the architectural side. On the MEP side, it's getting there, it's getting better. It's not where architecture is, but it's still, I think, a lot better than what we can do with AutoCAD, as long as you have the right people working in the tools. You want minimal issues during CA. Nobody likes having to answer a whole bunch of RFIs, change orders, ASIs. You don't want to be pushing out 50,000 bulletins. It's no fun for anyone. And yeah, you want the BIM. You want the beautiful images for marketing. I say this as a former designer and as an owner. We produce beautiful images for marketing on the airport side, within the airport all the time, for getting our business cases out to the city council and to airport leadership. And that's just as important on the design side when you're trying to do marketing for more work. All of these things are things that we really, really want on the design side.
So at Mortensen, similar to the design side, making the owner happy is one of the key goals for us. The approach that we use for that, as far as VDC and BIM is concerned, is maximizing owner value through the use of VDC. The project we're on is a tri-venture, so it's 3 different contractors that came together to work as a corporation because of the scale of the project. But Mortensen drove the use case of VDC to maximize that value to the owner. The turnover portion of the project is critical. We want to make sure that we transition all the information that we've gained throughout the design and the construction of the building so that the owner and their maintenance team has all the information they need so that they can seamlessly start operating their building and be very happy with that. There's a lot of additional data when it comes to BIM that we don't want to give them. We don't want to give them every little shim, pack, and nut and bolt. We want to give them the valuable data, the stuff they're going to use. So culling that data and giving them the things that they're going to get value out of. We want their team to utilize BIM in the field. We want their asset team to utilize the technology to the best effect so that they can be more efficient, they can streamline costs. And we don't want to get a call in the year, right? We got a 1-year warranty. We don't want to keep getting that phone call. So we're delivering a quality building, quality project, and VDC really helps that process by tracking and checklists and double checking a lot of things. Like the design team, we want a happy owner so that we can get more work. We like owners that continue building, and we want to do that building for them.
Now, you have some intrinsic value in doing BIM, regardless of any owner requirements or anything else, right?
Absolutely.
So, for example, even if a sophisticated owner like Denver International Airport didn't mandate anything for BIM, you guys would use a lot of these tools regardless, just for your own advantage, right?
Absolutely. It was very refreshing to come to an owner that saw the value the way we see it, that was willing to take a chance and really utilize technology that's available. We use MEP coordination overhead. We've been using Navisworks for years. We do shop drawing level lift drawings. So we utilize VDC anyway, but having an owner that isn't scared of it and understands the value of it was very refreshing.
Yeah. And the same thing applies on the design side. When I was working for Iron Horse, we were doing BIM before we ever started doing any work at DIA. We were doing BIM on projects where, frankly, the client was saying, we don't want Revit. We want CAD. We don't want to see a model. We don't want to see Navisworks. We just want our CAD. Well, for us, there was value in doing BIM, so we kept doing it. And at the end of the day, we exported the CAD files because that's what they wanted.
Yeah, so generally the point is if you're looking at it from a purely selfish perspective, from any of these stakeholders, there's advantages to doing a BIM process for an implementation. So the next question then is, what is possible? Well, anything is possible with enough time and money. You can do the entire project in Minecraft, if you like, airport, Minecraft. Not sure you'd want to, but it's possible. The thing is, what's possible for this specific project or program that you're going after? Is it a full BIM implementation for the entire airport, where you're developing standards and processes to be used downstream? Or is this just a specific project with minimal requirements? So all those questions have to be asked on the front end. 3D, 4D, 5D, 6D, however many Ds you want to put in the line. Yes, it's all possible, but is it practical, right? From a program management standpoint, yeah, it's great to have 3D models. You can do quantification, you can do sequencing and time, and you can even check the cost estimates against the contractor's stuff. Are you going to get all that? Is everybody going to provide it? The key here is to have everybody on the same page on the front end. Right of reliance is kind of the big buzz term right now. Are you legally allowed to use the model for basically construction purposes? So, or are you held to just the PDFs or paper documents? Does it have to be a wet stamp? Can you deliver a model? All that needs to be hashed out on the front end so that everybody has the same expectations going forward. You don't want to end up with a lot of, well, the PDF says this, but the model looks like that sort of thing, which does come up. 100% digital process, that is very accessible now. For some reason, people will still print out paper, regardless. On the DIA project, we had probably 150% digital process because we had multiple document control solutions in parallel, all doing the same stuff. We had the contractor handling RFIs through their system. They have Unifier. We had A-Connects for the program management team. DIA was looking at rolling out SharePoint at one point. Lots of different solutions, all digital. Doesn't mean they're all the most efficient thing. We're running Buzzsaw as well, Field, you name it. Point is, it's definitely possible, and it's generally practical on most projects to go almost 100% digital. You can access construction documents in the field through iPads or any kind of tablets. Like I said, we had that on multiple levels on this program.
And cost effective too. One estimate is approximately 6,000 sheets were generated, or drawing sheets were generated for this project. Can you imagine trying to keep a couple of sets of that on site?
Actually, Josh has
pass it to Josh and say, what was the cost implication of paper documentation versus iPads? And
So we did analyze the implementation of the digital documents using iPads and Bluebeam and Box. The drawing set is over 8,000 pages. We requested with the architect and the design team to slip sheets. So every time an RFI or a submittal or a bulletin comes out, it's a new sheet. So when you include those, it's over 8,000 pages.
About that tall.
They're all E-size sheets, so 30 by 42. One drawing set would cost over $8,000 to print. iPads are, $900. So at the end of the day, when we looked at all the numbers, we saved $1,000 per user per year by putting an iPad in their hands. That's big money. We had over $100,000 duplication budget that we've spent on iPads, and I think we spent $60,000 on that. And then there was a printing budget as well for the RFIs and the submittals and all those other things that we didn't touch as well that was over $60,000. So we've saved some really good money for the owner by utilizing digital documents.
You can use those numbers when you go to your boss and ask for a new iPad. Just reference Josh.
You're going to save the company $1,000 by giving me a $900 iPad.
A year, $1,000 a year.
That includes the cost of the iPad. That includes the cloud support, so paying somebody to host the drawings. And that vets out between superintendents, foremen, project managers. We analyze the time savings they have, their previous workflow versus their current workflow, and it was bought off at all levels. So absolutely digital documents.
Yeah, and you can go beyond just looking at the 2D documents in the field. You can bring up Navisworks models. You can use Glue. You can see everything live right in the field on an iPad if you need to. You can do the full design review process. So through planning and design, you can have this an entire digital process. People marking up things online and distributed teams viewing and reviewing things concurrently across the world if you want. Record documents, some municipalities are starting to accept digital deliverables. Some still want wet stamps, but it's moving to where you can just submit electronic documents. You really won't have to print anything. And then, of course, the CA process, there are lots of solutions out there for managing RFIs and ASIs. And additional bulletins and beyond.
You might have turned it off.
What'd you do, Josh?
I wasn't supposed to unplug it?
Well, that's Mark's slide. He doesn't like it.
You and your animations.
It's really cool. Believe me.
I like that we just
I
got
know
a
you
picture
will.
of the blank screen.
Yeah, you can get a picture of this.
All right. Won't even do that.
There we
What
go.
do we have now? Is it up there?
We got a white slide instead of a black slide. That's good. That's
Okay.
There it goes.
So this is, I don't know if my mic's working or not, but I tend to talk loud anyways. What we're just going through here is just kind of what's possible. From the owner's perspective, I want good design. I want clear design. From the construction, I want concise, consolidated, very precise installation. We're packing a lot of stuff into a small space. We want that coordination. We recognize contractors are benefiting from this, so we should be benefiting from it as well. The closeout, as Josh mentioned, the slide went real quick there, but that transition to sustainable operations, that's something that Mortensen is very, very strongly a big proponent of. That's basically engaging with the owner and the contractor team during the middle to end of that construction process, where the owner gets to capture the knowledge and data that is produced by the design team and the construction team, and ultimately begin our operations at a much higher point than the point where the industry is used to, where it's, okay, here's your keys, here's your as-built, here's your documents, good luck, call me when you're ready to do the warranty walk in 11 months. And then as the owner, we have to learn what it is that we just paid $500-some million for. Mortensen's been key in helping us get through that transition process, really been very good in engaging our maintenance crews and facilities managers, so we're on our way to doing that. The operations part is a big part that we're very interested in as the owner, and that's capturing real data and tying that back to our models that we can then share with our consultants. Right now, you get a model from a designer, and it may have that design information in there, or it may have the manufacturer's information in there that has their little URL to go and click to their website. That information really isn't that important to the owner, but baselining our facility is very important. So we're working with the construction team and the commissioning team and the design team to make sure that all those blanks on the left side get filled in by the time we leave, so that we have real analytic data that we can use moving forward, not only for future work, but for setting our baseline in operations.
So Mark, you mentioned the transition to sustainable operations. That's an approach that Mortensen takes where as soon as subcontractors are substantially complete, we sit them down and we get the owner in the room and we transition that information while it's on everybody's mind fresh. If you wait until the end of the project and subcontractor A has been off the job for 6 months, they've forgotten about the job. They're on the next job, they're thinking about other things. So if you plan ahead and put those people in the same room, including the operations people, the owner, then they can transfer that information so that when it comes time to turn over the building, they're already 90% there. So that's the approach that we take to close that loop of transition, where a lot of information was previously lost in industry. We get a lot of feedback from owners, so that's very, very helpful.
So what's possible on the design side? Well, Will touched on this already. How much time and how much money do you have? That's really what it comes down to. There's a lot we can do as designers, even from MEP to structure to the architects, but it all costs money, it all takes time, especially when you're dealing with disruptive technology like BIM, where not everybody's on board, or not everybody has done projects like this before. There's a learning curve, and it's steep in some cases. A coordinated design model is definitely feasible, again, depending on time and money and owner priorities. We didn't coordinate every single line. We coordinated lines down to a certain dimension, and that was pretty much it, because beyond that dimension, it was going to be shoot, I forget the term, but it was a decision that the construction team was going to make. It was
Means and
going to be yes, means and methods. Thank you. Improved document generation. Improved document generation is huge in BIM. I don't know about anybody else, but as a young architect, there was nothing that I hated more than going through a door schedule and checking every floor plan and every elevation against that door schedule and trying to keep it all coordinated. Reconciled record design model. This is something that is fairly unique to DIA, at least in terminology. The design team didn't want to produce as-builts. As designers, we don't produce as-builts. So what we ended up doing was sort of compromising at what's been called a reconciled record design model, where the contractor's model was checked against our model, particularly in areas where a particular element was a critical asset to the airport, and they were reconciled and brought into accord to a certain tolerance. Again, depends on time and money. Contractor engagement, that's really not something that should come down to time and money. It's something that, as designers, we need to do more of. There are some great design firms out there and some great contractors out there that are doing this well. Mortensen has done it really well. Gensler, who was the design lead on this project and contract holder, did a great job of trying to engage with their contractors and all their different design, all the sub-consultants. But not everyone does that. And until they start doing that, they're going to be at the back of the pack.
So were there challenges with some of the sub-consultants you were dealing with, people not being up to speed?
How can you ask me such a loaded question?
That's
That's just not
you're
fair.
leading him right down to the path
Just
here.
for the
Well,
benefit
remember,
of the group.
You're really the owner now.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to walk that line carefully. Jeez. On any project, there are always going to be some consultants that, whether they're subcontractors or sub-consultants, who aren't going to be as good about engaging and buying into the process as possible. It's an unfortunate fact of the AEC industry. Some folks just aren't going to keep up. And it's to their detriment, because they'll end up not doing work with that particular client again when you don't give that client what they need, what they're requiring in their contract.
So from a what's possible standpoint, it's really about making sure that your team and everybody that's underneath you is able to do the job and to help bring them along and make sure that it all gets done, right?
Yeah, and a lot of that, not a lot of that, some of that does fall on the owner. A lot of it falls on the design lead, but for the most part, it falls on the individual sub-consultant. Either you're keeping up or you're not. It's that simple.
So what's possible? From the construction side, we've got a lot of great subcontractors in the Denver area that are and have been utilizing CAD and fab level drawings to install MEP systems, including fire. So we do MEP coordination overhead, right? We've been doing that for a long time. So that's obviously possible. Get a fully coordinated subcontractor model. We can do it. We do it all the time. We can laser scan things. We can check that the as-built was where they put it. There's field conditions sometimes that there's a PT tendon that we didn't coordinate, and so that sleeve needed to shift a few inches. Well, we can go out there and laser scan it and find out exactly where it's at. We can use a tape measure. We can do a lot of different ways. We deliver that 100% as-built to the owner. That's a common practice for us. We can utilize prefabrication. So are there repeatable elements in the building that you could off-site manufacture and then just slide into the building? Bathroom pods are a perfect example of that. We looked at that on this project. It didn't pencil out, so we didn't use it, but it's a possibility for your project, so look at that. Turning the data over to the owner at the end, that's a big next step that's coming. A lot of owners are going to understand the value after this conference of, taking the data from the construction and pushing that to their operations team and utilizing that to run their facilities better, more streamlined and cheaper. So that's possible. And putting the model in the user's hands in the field. So that's a quality control guide there on the left, utilizing BIM 360 Glue. We push the models out in the field from the subcontractors, and they were able to use them, and they do use them all the time. The foremen use them, the superintendents use them. Technology in the field is a big deal. So there's a lot is possible on the construction side. You can do just about anything. Hardware is really caught up with the model uses. You shouldn't have a problem viewing any model size that is usable. I mean, yeah, we could crash an iPad if we wanted, but the levels that you're going to coordinate are sufficiently sized that they work. So let's use them. Yeah, a lot is possible.
Yeah, and to add to that, the horizontal construction, I noticed we have one of our fellow co-workers out here in the audience from Kiewit Construction. They did a lot of layout directly from the CAD applications. They're performing, creating as-built based on the survey data, so taking survey data directly from the field into Civil 3D and creating models for that to deliver to the owner. We are, in the meantime, comparing them to the design models to make sure everything got built and placed correctly. So it's not just the vertical applications, it's the Kiewit, or the horizontal stuff, as represented here by Kiewit.
Well, and that's something I didn't even touch on, is we're pulling points from the field as well, utilizing Autodesk point layout. And so, we push those points back into the model. We can as-built that way. We can push points out to the field for layout. So use that as well.
And just to touch on something Josh mentioned earlier, everyone on this project understands that a little bit more than 11 months from now, the switch is going to be flipped on this building. It's going to go live. And when that day comes, everything will already be in Maximo, our asset management program. And everything will be ready to go for our facilities management folks to start maintaining the building, dealing with warranties, taking care of routine maintenance.
Yep.
And that, I think that is something that is a testament to everyone on the design, construction, project management team.
In fact, from the owner side, we've told the contractors and the designers, please don't plan on delivering a set of plans and O&M manuals in hard copy to us. We just don't need them. We want it all electronic. We want it integrated in our system. We're working through how to integrate that content into our system right now. We're 11 months away from opening the door, and we're already building our FM system.
So what's realistic? So we talked about what's possible if you had carte blanche and you can do whatever you want. But for a specific program, what is a realistic solution? So budget comes into play. Does BIM cost money? Well, that's a contentious point. Yeah, maybe it costs a little more up front. You've got to educate people. But there should not be a line item for BIM. You end up saving money. There's countless studies. Mortensen did a couple comparing buildings done in a traditional method versus BIM side by side. At the end of the day, it saves money. But yes, there are some upfront costs. You have to have decent hardware. You have to train some staff. You have to have specific people like the four of us engaged to manage the processes as you go through. These are not traditional roles, typically. They bleed over a little bit. But there are some things you have to consider and what is realistic for a specific project. Schedule is also an issue. How much time do you have to plan and implement all this? If it's a fast burn, it's obviously a little bit more of a challenge. If you've got 3 weeks to get everybody up and running and hit the ground, you can't do quite as much as you can if you have 6 months to plan the process. Again, skill sets versus training versus troubleshooting. So training a specific exercise in somebody that doesn't know how the software works or the process works. Troubleshooting is when something breaks. You have to consider both. So when I used to teach Revit classes a while ago, and I used to explain, if you don't know how to use the software, that's a training issue. If the software is not doing what it's supposed to do, That's troubleshooting. But like I said, you do have to consider both throughout the life of the program. Shoot the moon or low-hanging fruit? Yeah, you can. There's a lot of analogies around shoot the moon. Shoot the moon because if you miss, you'll land in the stars and all that silly stuff. The point is, there's a lot. It's possible, right? They went to the moon in 1969. We haven't really been back a lot since, but it's possible to get out there. There's a lot of science, there's a lot of math, there's a lot of people involved. So you have to accept what your goals are on a project and get all the stakeholders engaged, define who is in control of what piece of this, and scope it out in great detail to make it a success.
So at the airport project here, it was refreshing to have an owner that was as sophisticated as they were, and they knew what they want. They got some good consultants on board here that told them the right things. So we had a very specific level of detail matrix that was requiring and requesting certain data from our subcontractors and ourselves. There's that matrix went through half a dozen times with different people about what could be delivered, what was realistic as far as there's no subs in our area that do that. So, you know, either you can have us do it or you can do it yourself if you really want it. But, you know, you have the discussion of what's the value to those things, and then you hash that out.
And that was all after the round of discussions we had on the design side about what we could deliver, when, and what was realistic.
The project we're on has a very specific minority and women-owned business requirement from the mayor. They were shooting for 30%, is that right?
Yes.
And so that dictated what subcontractors we had to entertain. We couldn't just go find the biggest sub in the state and say, you got it all. So we had to break the contract up, and part of that meant, well, subcontractor B may not be as sophisticated when it comes to the BIM process as another subcontractor, and so we had to pull them along. We had to educate them. We had training sessions. We showed them how we use the software and why we use the software, and they came along with us. That's the support and training. I mentioned earlier that we studied prefabrication on this. We had everything lined up. We had a prefab bathroom pod coming to us, and at the last minute, some numbers changed and we weren't able to pursue that. So that wasn't realistic for this project. We've had prefab on other projects that it was realistic. So a lot of times there's a more prohibitive cost to prefab up front, but if you can shorten your schedule duration by 3, 4, 6 months, you get that back in GCs. So look through that. The design model elements that we wouldn't typically have a subcontractor model, communications, speakers, fire alarm, accessories, those sort of things the design team did put in, and so we're reusing those and pushing them back to the owner. At the beginning there was a strong push to utilize BIM 360 Field. Was it Vela at that point? It was Vela.
It was Vela.
We were going to use Vela, but then Autodesk bought them, and that was a good thing, and so from the start, we purchased the licensing for BIM 360 Field, and it was agreement. There were people pushing back, but that's what we're using, and we're going to go down that path. So that's really helped the quality control processes that we use, putting the checklists in the field in the hands of the quality control people. The offline capability is a big deal. At the airports and airports in general, they've got strict wireless guidelines, meaning you can't just transmit an SSID through your wireless card. You have to go through the FAA and all these requirements, and so we were offline. Even though we were right next to a great big hub, we didn't have web access in the field. We're in a 50-foot hole in the ground, and so the offline capability of BIM 360 Field was critical. I don't have the checklist numbers, but it's a lot. Every caisson, every drilled pier, every grade beam, everything got checked, rechecked, and double checked. So BIM 360 Field was huge for us.
So what's realistic on the design side? Well, again, time, money, it all comes down to the factors. What are your clients' values? What do they want most? Do they need this done by a specific date because they have a high-profile occupant that's going into the space, like Weston? Do they have a really strict budget because they're a city agency and the local press is all over them every time the budget goes up by $1, even if it doesn't actually go up and it's just a feasibility study?
You sound like the owner, Brendan.
Nobody was pleased with any of that stuff. Is it about the asset management program? Well, in our case it was, but not every airport has an asset management program. So for them, that's not critical. Factors process. Are you doing IDP? Are you doing traditional design bid build? Are you doing design build? Those are all going to affect your budget, your schedule, and everything else. And your team. What are they capable of? We've got some great consultants on the design side. Including to touch on what Josh said with the MWBEs. We've got small businesses that are really savvy. The firm that I worked for specialized in BIM services. We did all BIM development, but others, not as much. They saw BIM as a barrier to adoption. That was something that we, as a firm, tried to talk them through because we knew it wasn't. So there's all these factors, and it all comes down to what does your client want? What's their priority?
From the owner side, we asked ourselves what's realistic. And again, we had to go back and say, what do we have now? Well, we had this. We had 7 trailers full of as-builts and binders that we didn't know what to do with. We didn't want to get into that. What is our end use? Our end use is take this data, push it into our asset management platform. How do we do that? How much do we want to invest? How much money and manpower really needs to be put into this? A lot of these studies were done from the owner side, and ultimately we did come up what I think is the right decision in doing this. We had talked earlier on with the contractors and the designers and said, how many project engineers would you have sitting in this corral versus a BIM manager who's doing both lift drawings and rebar placement drawings and embed placement drawings all in a model. And the amount of manpower trade-off that we got for the technology was phenomenal. We're somewhere around 3 to 1. For every one BIM manager, we would have had to have 3 additional PEs doing that work in a traditional methodology. So it was very realistic to approach this process with a technology base and move forward with it rather than sit there and let's just load it up with manpower and do it the old-fashioned way. So, yeah.
So how do you implement all this? We've talked about what's realistic and what's possible. Really as a team, we've got 4 different stakeholders here and we all need to engage. We have different interests, we have common interests, but we have to go together as a team forward. There's your BIM right there. That's the beautiful image for marketing.
Sexy.
So from a program management standpoint, planning. You have to engage everybody early. You have to set out what needs to be done when and how you're going to do it. That's not just an execution plan. That's setting up whether it's going to be standards for the airport or what are the requirements. You have to plan the process from the beginning. Execution plan, BIM execution plans are great, but they are really living documents. They change. Change management is key on any of this process. So set it up, plan it, write it down, and then develop a process to update it as you go forward. Contracts, this stuff needs to be tied to the actual contracts because otherwise, how do you enforce anything? So if you tie an execution plan or design standards manual, say for the airport, specifically to a contract for work or a task order, then you have some leverage to actually enforce this stuff. Otherwise, it doesn't really go anywhere. Again, documentation and communication are key. So whether it's an execution plan or a series of white papers, anytime anything changes, the information needs to get disseminated to the entire team. Everybody needs to have sign off and be on board.
Stakeholder engagement, very important, internally and externally, bringing everybody together to understand why it is we're doing what we're doing. Use case analysis, we went and did a lot of studies, figured out what was the best way to do it and what platforms should we do it with. Our platform deployment was critical, and that was a platform deployment at the time. And that was, 2011. So we're trying to engage with the latest platforms at the time and move team into using those platforms and recognizing that it cannot be static. You have to be able to be flexible with that platform deployment. Process deployment comes afterwards. Once we get our platform set up, then we do what Will had mentioned is, how do we go through the process of implementing the design standards manual? How do we share information between design consultants? How do we share information between the designer and contractor? How do they all share information through, as airport environments are infamous for, the firewall? A lot of that information and process had to be developed before we began actual content development. So how do you implement? You have to really think through. It's not just, okay, go. There's a lot of exercises that have to go through to get to where you need to start.
And it's not work in a silo either. It's the entire team engaging from the beginning.
So in BIM, we talk a lot about process. As technologists, we talk a lot about software. We talk a lot about hardware. We like these things. These are fun. Well, maybe not process, depending on your particular. But none of this really happens without people, without the wetware, without Will over here, without Josh, without Mark, without Mike Mogul at Gensler in the back, without Chris Herrera from Kiewit. None of this works without people, without educated, intelligent people that have buy-in. So really what this all comes down to for implementation is education. You got to educate yourself. I don't think I need to preach about that here. You've got to educate your staff. You've got to educate your clients. In this case, we had a pretty educated client who was actually educating us, but in some cases, you still have to educate that really sophisticated client because you need to educate them on what's actually realistic with these processes that they're trying to implement. You need to educate your consultants. As the BIM manager on this project, educating consultants was probably, aside from family reviews, the biggest consumer of time for me. Trying to educate people, not tell them, educate them on what they could do with this software, what they can do with these processes, and that, yes, this is not just going to be good for this project, this is going to be good for you long-term and get you more work.
I think we could add educate your boss to this across for all stakeholders. Senior leadership, they really don't know what BIM is. They've heard the buzzword and they think it's cool. We want it for our program from whatever capacity we're speaking from. There's a lot of education that has to go to the higher ups within your organization as well.
Yep. And that's even when they have big buy-in. My boss was all in on BIM, all in on Revit, but I still spent a lot of time educating her because she wasn't able to be in the trenches because, well, she's a principal. She's off doing principal things. She doesn't have time to come to things like this.
How do you implement BIM on a project? Communication is key. Design side and owner side is talking about it. We don't want to hide a BIM execution plan as an attachment at the back of the contract and then be surprised when that sub didn't plan on doing that. So you communicate up front. You make sure that all your project management team is aware of the implications for their scope of work. What does that mean for interiors? What does that mean for MEP? What does that mean for enclosure systems? We don't want subs to be surprised when we request their data from them as BIM. We work backwards from milestone dates and make sure that the staffing and manpower is available for that scope. BIM is intensive. It takes a lot of effort in order to get to where you need to be on time. So you got to plan from the schedule, work backwards from that. It was nice that the owner gave us a bunch of standards that this is what you need to give us. So it was very clear. We weren't driving the boat saying, what do you want? Here's something we could do, here's something, here's something. They said, we know what we want and this is it, go get it for us. So it was very clear and it was very easy to make sure our subs delivered that for us.
Now, that's not always the case, though. You
No.
might be working on another airport somewhere else that's in the middle of a big implementation, and part of the scope becomes developing those standards. So it's something that really needs to be scoped out on the front end.
Make that very clear, absolutely.
We were also fortunate that the client in this case was willing to treat the standards as something of a living document. That, you know, when we did come up against walls where, hey, the software simply won't do this. We've tried, we've talked to Autodesk, we've talked to other designers, it just won't do it. The client was like, okay, that's reasonable, adjust to the standards. We had our exceptions list, and that was a very important document for us.
Working through software was a big deal. There's multiple platforms that were used on this. So you know, you need to know how you're going to get your data from, say, Tekla or ArchiCAD if you're using that, or, you know, is the plugin that they're using for AutoCAD, does it have the additional software for the new version of Revit when it comes out? Is your model data going to come across? You got to plan those things. You can't just jump off the bridge there. We had a sub that upgraded to 15 without telling anybody, and all of their data disappeared one day. And so we had to get with Autodesk and make sure that we got their object enabler, and, you know, tracking those things. You got to make sure that you have that. It was a big team of just VDC staff, just BIM guys for the sub. This is the construction side only. If you counted the detailers for the structural steel, the concrete, the MEP systems, the enclosure systems, there was 3 main scopes of enclosure that were all VDC. At one point in time, we had 18 full-time VDC staff just doing BIM on the construction side. It doesn't count the design team, it doesn't count the owner. So it's big.
So we'll move on to how it's managed. A little repetitive here, but documentation, change management, communication. So document everything. Have your meeting, plan everything out, do your execution plan, distribute it, and then you need a plan for when it inevitably changes, how is that handled, right? We need sign off. Who gets to sign it off? How is that documented? How is that information distributed again? Meetings, feeling lonely? Have a meeting. Of course, meetings are key for all this, and not just for meeting sakes. We all sit through way too many meetings, but it is really important to get everybody in the same room, either physically or virtually, and make sure everybody's on the same page for this process.
How's it managed from the owner side? Process modification. Again, we talked about how we implemented a process, and Brendan had touched on sometimes things just don't work the way you want them to. As an owner, you need to be flexible to an extent that you can modify the way you're doing things and move forward and experiment with those changes, see if they're right, and take that risk. A lot of city and or public agencies have their process in place, and it's been that way for 20, 40 years, and they're going to do it that way because that's the way I do it. That's the way I've done it. That's the way I'm going to do it. You have to be flexible. As platforms change and process changes, we need to incorporate that into our everyday work. You can't be afraid of it. You have to embrace it. Platform transitions is another one that Josh touched on. Same topic on the owner side. How many have worked at places, particularly airports, where they say, we want all of our content delivered to us in CAD, but not only CAD, but the 2006 version of CAD, because that was the standard I set in 2005. You can't do that. We have to be able to be flexible and move those platforms forward. Autodesk has seen fit to say, you can't go backwards anyways, so we all have to move forward. So we have to recognize that forward-looking approach has to be put in place when we're talking about platform transitions. Process and platform integration. You could look internal to both of these, or you can look external. So if you create a process and then you create a platform and you change one of those, they have to work together, and you have to see how each one of those ties together. If I jump a new platform, does that change my process? Is a new stair module come out with Revit? No, it hasn't. But if it were, what would I do? You know, and also, how do these platforms and processes that we've developed integrate into other platforms and processes? We've got a GIS environment that we have to feed information to. Why is that important? Probably not important to a lot of contractors and designers here, but as an airport owner, we have a deliverable to the FAA. That deliverable has to come in a GIS base. So I need to know how these new platform changes are going to be transitioned into that electronic deliverable to our ultimate stakeholder, which is the FAA. Internally, there's other platforms. What's going to happen when we jump from a Maximo 6.2 to a Maximo 7.5 implementation? How do the interfaces between the content that's created in a BIM environment talk back and forth with that SQL environment that Maximo lives in? So a lot of these things have to be done, and it's a lot of process and procedure implementation, but you can't be rigid in that. You have to be flexible. And despite the adage of indecision being the key to flexibility, that's not the case. You have to be decisive, move forward, take the risk, and manage to the best you can. Are there going to be pitfalls along the way? Yes, but a lot less than asking your consultants to continue to deliver to you in AutoCAD 2006.
Or 2000.
Or 2000, as we have seen. Oh, yes, and 10 copies of CDs is not necessary either.
How's it managed? You need a clear contract. That might be a contradiction in terms, but it's something you need. Oh, come on. Everybody here has always had perfectly clear contracts, right? No
ambiguities
or
ever?
Obfuscation or anything like that. PXP needs to be clear and preferably brief, because if it's not brief, nobody's going to look at it. You need clear standards. In the case of DIA needed not just standards for what was delivered, but because BIM is a disruptive technology that a lot of consultants hadn't used, they also had to standardize processes that, in 2 or 3 years, we won't have to standardize because everybody will know how to do this work. But they didn't 4 years ago. Internal QA/QC. That's a really big thing for the airport. It was really big for the design team. Essentially, all I did was QA/QC and education. You got to communicate openly and honestly. If you're not doing that, if you're stonewalling, if you're CYAing, if you're just not communicating, then you're going to have problems. Team-wide buy-in. You can't emphasize that enough. And it's not something that is always under control. As a city agency, we don't always necessarily allow our consultants to work with the consultants and contractors that they want to. In this particular case, the design work was bid out in 3 or 4 packages. Mm-hmm. So not all of the consultants were ones that Gensler, as a design team, got to choose. But we still had to bring those consultants into the fold and get full buy-in. And remember, the process supports a client goal or requirement. That's what it all comes down to, and that's why this project is on the track that it is, and it's going to be successful, because Josh with construction, Will with program management team, Mike Mogul from Gensler, they all kept in mind that this was a client goal, that this was a requirement for the FAA, for the city auditor, for asset management. They understood that, and they kept their eye on that.
So managing from the construction side, once you've communicated with your subs and everybody's aware of the processes that you're going to use, now you're starting to do the work. This is really the easy part. I mean, it's easy that it's hard, but at least it's clear and you know your end path. You work backwards from your critical milestones. We do weekly coordination meetings, we assign tasks, we sign off levels. One thing we needed to be aware of and ready for was design bulletins. We started the project early. It was released in packages, so we got the structural below level 1, and then we got the structure, and then we got the architecture and the mechanical systems. And so we need to hit the ground running with less than 100% of our information. So when a new design bulletin would come out and revise some things, we need to be flexible and maybe go back and readdress some of those areas that we'd already worked through. And not just MEP systems, but the enclosure systems as well. There was some revision to the approach of what the design was going to be, and so we need to be aware of that and be ready for it. So, we utilize cloud software. There's some tools out there that can automate a lot of the tasks that you're going to have to do, so the cloud might as well be your network. That worked really well for us. And understanding when the software upgrades were going to happen, and getting the team ready and letting them know, okay, you can pull the trigger, ready, set, all right, let's go. So meetings. We had meeting with the enclosure guy, meeting with the mechanical guy, a lot of communication going on projects. You really got to think and talk about BIM for it to be successful.
Now, did you have a process for documenting the results of any of these meetings? So kind of a change management plan, if you changed the way that you did your construction coordination meeting?
Yeah, so I mean, we're taking meeting minutes, we're documenting, who's committed to what. The record models are archived, and so, if somebody just changes something in their model and says, oh no, we did it like our model says, right? I mean, we could always go back and back check, and that's come up a few times, but it wasn't much of an issue.
Yeah, we had a weekly meeting, which was everybody, all the stakeholders from a BIM perspective, that would come and bring up issues. We'd look at exceptions. We'd look at anything that came up during the week. Of course, the contractor would have their own BIM and coordination meetings outside of that. So with the design team, the owner now has a whole BIM staff as well. But weekly, we would get at least the leads from everybody that's involved together just to discuss what had come up, document it in meeting minutes, and make sure everybody was on the same page. All right, so how do you deliver all this? Well, a lot of QA, QC, so you have to check from a program management standpoint. The design team is creating all this content, and the contractor is building from this and delivering it to the owner. Our role was to make sure it was all going smoothly and meeting the requirements of the owner. So that's a lot of QA, QC. That's developing processes, that's making adjustments to standards if they're required, and communicating that to everybody. What that means is reports. So yeah, that's a report card. There were a series of very detailed audits on the models for this project. There were incremental kind of high-level audits. If you wait till the end, you're pretty much doomed to fail. You have to watch this all the way through so that it doesn't get too far off track. Setting up those standards and those processes for reporting on all this is key for succeeding. Phasing and packaging, so how are these things going to be delivered? I've heard a lot, specifically this week, about people changing their terminology and how they're delivering. It's no longer a traditional conceptual design, SD, DD, CD, design, bid, build. Everything's packaged, everything's complicated, especially with an airport. So knowing how all that goes and being able to keep track of these deliverables at these various milestones, and it might not be a traditional 30% design set, it might be something that's key. That means engaging the contractor, that means something that's key to the schedule. It means engaging the contractor, the design team, everybody needs to be on board. Where do we need to make sure that we're on the right path to get to the next milestone in an efficient and effective manner? And then consequences, again, you got to tie this stuff to contracts somehow, because if everybody's not meeting the desired deliverables in a timely manner, how do you correct that? what if somebody says, well, that's just not our process? You have to have some sort of consequences tied to that, whether it's retainage or something. You have to put that in writing somewhere. And then for these deliverables and reports, you need sign off. So everybody has to get on the same page, look at the same report, understand where we are and where we need to be, not just at the end, but incrementally throughout the process.
How is it delivered? There's a couple approaches on this. One is, how is it delivered out to your consultants, and how do they deliver back to you? You deliver out, at Denver, we deliver out a kit of parts, as it were, and ask them to provide design models and construction models using that content because it is recognized by the airport as the content that is necessary. And at the end, we're looking at reconciled design models and as-built construction models validation. So we're asking the contractors to create their as-builts and validate those as-builts. And as Brendan talked about earlier, the reconciled design model, and Will mentioned, that's something that is very important. That data in the model back to the owner is where we take control and control our future on our life cycle costs. We get the data, we set our baseline, we put that into our asset management system, we have the data available to us for future projects and for maintenance of our facility. So as much as we all in the design world want to be creative individuals and work on really cool projects, it's about the data. For long-term holders, it's about the data. For the strip mall owner, not so much about the data. For an airport, we're not going anywhere. We're not shutting the doors tomorrow. We have to maintain this facility. We have other stakeholders to answer to. FAA wants data. City auditor wants data. Did you do this the right way? Is this the best for the city and the county constituents that pay into our coffers? A lot of that
Let's clarify. The
Yes.
airport does not take any taxpayer money. The airport is completely self-sufficient.
However, as a city department, it is perceived, and there are other airports around that do rely on taxpayers' money, and the perception is that they better be spending money wisely. If you don't have the data to back up how you're spending your money and your operations, it's hard to justify moving forward and spending more money on new facilities. So great that we get construction packages and consultant information, design models, but it's really about data. We've transitioned from that turn me over a building to turn me over the data. The building's going to be there. The data is what I need to run it.
So how is it delivered? As designers, we've still got our traditional deliverables. We need to deliver our drawings, we need to deliver our specs, and that isn't going to change anytime soon. Building departments are making some progress on accepting digital delivery, but they still want sheets. They still want specs. They're not going to start accepting models anytime soon, and from a design perspective, I wouldn't want them to. We are, however, still delivering those models to the airport. We have to deliver them through design. We have to deliver them for coordination, and then we need to reconcile them, at least for DIA, for the final facilities model. E-specs is something that was in this project at the beginning, and essentially the infrastructure wasn't there, and there were some other issues, so it wasn't part of this project, but future projects at the airport will be. And data. We've got to deliver the data native to the model, and we've got to have it integrated, or it could be native to the model. It could be something that is just part of the design, and we've got other data that's going to be integrated later because it is information from the commissioning that goes on. And all of that has to be bundled together and delivered to the client.
And again, this is stuff that you want to get set up front so that everybody's on the same page and you know what to expect. It's not going to work if you wait till final deliverables and you figure out that you need e-specs incorporated in your model, obviously.
Speaking as a designer, if some of this isn't documented, I'm not giving it to my client. If it's not in the contract or a project execution plan, sorry, I know you really want it, but it's not there. So you're going to have to give me ad services.
I will say that even sometimes when it is in the contract, they say, I'm not going to give it to them. Be aware of that.
No comment.
So delivering the data to the owner at the end, that's going to be in your as-built. You can't just take your signed-off models. We've gone around and done a reconciliation after our signed-off levels and make sure that any field revisions got caught, any areas that were left till field coordination get cleaned up. Using the cloud is critical on this sort of thing. You're going to have people all over the country, possibly the world, so having a robust network that they can access anywhere.
Now, speaking of clouds, are you using point clouds on this? Were you guys?
Well, sure, we're using point clouds on this.
Are you scanning things to verify as-built conditions?
We did. We've done a couple laser scans, yeah, so we can verify that the as-built conditions are where the subs planned them to be, where they said they're going to be, and that when they moved something, they moved it like they said they were going to. And so there's spot checking that you can do. It's not very practical to laser scan a whole project yet. But we can do one-offs on critical areas. We can deliver that to the owner. Point files are large, so that's difficult, but we can do that. The BIM 360 field database. We mentioned earlier that utilizing BIM 360 field, we are tracking all of our assets as equipment. They're getting checklists done on them. We're barcoding all of the equipment in the building for the owner so that they can utilize that barcode with their Maximo system, but we can utilize it with our BIM 360 field system as well. So as we're tracking all the equipment and we're verifying that the checklists were done on every piece of equipment, somebody looked at it, made sure it was working the way they said it was going to, we're turning that over as a database to the owner. So they can import that into their system and hit the ground running with their asset management system.
So Mark, speaking of back to the point clouds, DIA has their own laser scanner and it's becoming more prevalent throughout. Are you guys using that to back check the contractor on this program?
No, we're not.
You're not?
We're relying on the contractor's visual scans to validate their installations. We'll take that information. We have our survey scan crew busy on multiple other projects. I think we're over 30 projects in running at any given time. We're relying on our program management team to assure that we're getting that information correctly. We've had the discussions with the contractor, and there are certain areas that we want to check, but we're not going to double check the scan. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me.
To put my owner's hat back on, it's one thing to send your rep out to double check something the contractor has visually inspected and the designer has visually inspected, but when you've got a laser scan, what are they going to do? Just make another cloud that shows the exact same thing? That's a poor use of anyone's time or money.
Excellent. All right, so we're up for questions. Is BIM a red herring?
I roll
Do you
at
want
the
to repeat the
airport.
question?
The question was, how different is the BIM process in managing horizontal modeling? It's really not that different, because at the airport, everything is an asset. Pipes are assets, manholes are assets. Slabs on runways are particularly important assets. Lights and light cans in runways are very important assets. We're using Civil 3D because of its AEC object capability. We're able to tie data tables to those objects and get that information out and put it into our asset management system. Just to give you an example of where we manage that now is in our GIS platform, which is really not managed, it's more of a catalog. There are 8 million features in our GIS database. Each one of those could be a light, a panel on the roadway from Pena Boulevard up to the airport. That's 11 miles.
Something like 2,000 asset classes?
2,000 different feature types and 8 million features. All of our new horizontal content is modeled in Civil 3D, so I'm give you a quick example and how we've improved our horizontal process. In the last 2.5 years, we had 4 runway rehab and apron rehab projects. Any one of them was anywhere from 1,200 to 2,500 panel replacement project. The first one we did, they did a traditional method and then went out and tried to capture information after the runway was open and give us as-built so that we could take that information, put it into our asset management platform. That took 2 years to get as-builts. The next project, we had gotten a little further along in implementing the process, the BIM process for horizontal. Similar methodologies, design, capture, validate, data, and push. Second project, we got as-built in 18 months. Third project, we got it in 6 months. This last summer, we finished runway 725. It was a quick burn. I think we were 400 to 800 panels, somewhere in that range. 3 weeks after the project was done, I had asset data in my hands, ready to push into our system. Because we used an integrated BIM process in design, in construction capture, and validation.
And it was actual as-built data. What was there matched the existing conditions. It wasn't the as-built that is frequently more like adjusted as designed. It was real as-built data.
Yeah. So we do use the same relative process for horizontal assets. It's just we're able to capture a lot more quicker because we're actually capturing information as we're installing it. So all of our underground utilities come in before we do our as-builts for that come in before we do our concrete placement, just because they're capturing as they're placing.
In a lot of ways, it's easier for horizontal work because they are shooting it as they install it, and it's easier to create an as-built model of a utility or a road than it is a whole bunch of MEP content in a building. And maybe, so similar process, maybe different software applications, Civil 3D versus Revit. Maybe we use Navisworks to visualize and look at all this content and for the vertical stuff, and use InfraWorks for the horizontal.
And psychologically, Civil 3D has the advantage of it still says AutoCAD. So people don't freak out like they do when they go from AutoCAD to Revit. It's a different software platform. Oh my God, well, you know what? Civil 3D is pretty different from standard AutoCAD, but it's still the AutoCAD brand and AutoCAD name. So the users don't freak out as much. It's just, oh, this is AutoCAD with some new features. It's not, oh, this is a whole different platform with a whole different thing, even though it kind of is.
Y'all had the transition from design to contractor to model.
Oh, with the models?
With the models. I thought you meant personnel-wise, because he was design, now he's owner, now.
So that touches on right of reliance, and that was a discussion we had early on. And the design team committed to providing a right of reliance model at bulletin data points. And so we were able to utilize that existing design model for various purposes on our end. We'd modify it slightly, maybe take it a step or two further down the LOD, and then transition it over to the owner. Cloud sharing software, so either Buzzsaw or Box or any of those. But it was a conversation we had that we can use your model, right? That's not something that's going to be a problem, and that was agreed upon.
And that said, while we committed to delivering the model at bulletin points and certain deliverables, the construction team was moving forward anyways. They needed information before those bulletins. So we still had to negotiate situations where we were saying, okay, well, here is the model. It's not issued. We've made some changes and had to negotiate how the construction team was going to work with those changes that hadn't been officially issued.
We're a team. I mean, we trust the design team to do what they say they're going to do, and they did. And so we would take the design models at non-official releases, and we would reuse it. If there was some complex geometry that had gotten modeled that was difficult to understand, we'd go take a copy of it and look at it and possibly reuse it with the understanding that the contract says the documents and the bulletin dates and all that. But I feel like we've really approached this whole project as a team, atmosphere instead of a combative. And so it was pretty effective, I think.
I'm glad to hear the design and construction team talking that way. But fundamentally, from a higher perspective, from the owner's side, at the end of the day, the owner owns those models. That's what the city statute, for any work that happens at DIA, all that content belongs to the airport. And as the ultimate owner, it was our responsibility and need to have them share that information. So it was a very lengthy discussion early on saying, no, this is our content. You're building it for the airport, and we want the contractor to use it to the best ability that he can, and there's going to be a lot of sharing of information back and forth. I would hazard to guess the design team would say they learned a lot from seeing what the contract models are doing.
Yeah, and specifically, we used Buzzsaw and set up a weekly upload. Everybody uploaded their models every week, regardless, whatever stage it was, and that's outside of the official deliverable scope. So every week, everybody had what everybody else was doing at that point.
Yeah. And that was for coordination within the design team as well, because we weren't going to be pushing everybody, every model, every day, much less a couple of times a day or having live links. That it just wasn't feasible for the design team, both from a process standpoint and a contractual standpoint. Project managers freaked out when we suggested that. So that gave us a regular point where we could say, okay, we know on Monday that by Monday we need to have this stuff that we've been figuring out cleaned up to a point where somebody else can rely on that information to a reasonable degree within the design team.
Have you ever integrated project office, or were you all in your own separate home offices?
Can you repeat the question?
Did you have an integrated project office?
Okay, so did we?
Were you in your own home offices?
So the question is, did we have an integrated project office, or were we all in our own home offices? And the answer to that is yes and no. On the design side, we talked about doing that very early. We talked about co-housing out at the Worldport facility. DIA is not the most convenient airport in the world.
But it's one of the best.
Yes, but it's several miles outside of the city of Denver, and
25.
a lot of the consultants balked at the idea of having to commute out there on a daily basis, especially since it is technically within the city of Denver. That mileage wasn't billable back to the client. Now you could bill your employer depending on their personal policy, but you couldn't bill it to the airport itself. So that died pretty early.
Well, that said, we did co-locate out there, construction team,
Yeah, the construction
program
team
management
co-located.
team.
We got all of our subcontractors,
Yeah.
or the majority of the subcontractors out there. We've got 13 trailers. I think there's 65 people in management team, and not all of the detailing staff is there, but the leaders of the detailing are all there. And so that facilitates big room collaboration. We've done plenty of coordination on a whiteboard or on a big projector like this with all the stakeholders in the room. It's worked with constructability concerns. If there was an area of the building that we were having a hard time understanding what they wanted, we could get the design team in the room. There's several designers co-located as well. So we could sit around a conference table, and we'd have the steel stud contractor and the precast concrete and the tile guy and the designer all kind of talk through these details and say, all right, so what's the intent here? What are we trying to accomplish? Is this the best way to do it? What do you think if we try to swap it this way? But having all those team players in the same location is pretty key.
It's a lot easier to grab them from a cube over than it is to try and set up a meeting with everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And much like the Tri-Venture, the actual design was led by Gensler, but there were two architects of record. And I was co-located for 3 years between those two architects of record's offices, which were on opposite ends of Denver. And again, we had project managers who were co-located out at Worldport and working with the contractors on a daily basis. So it's a mishmash.
For cloud systems, does DIA require any frequent archiving, periodic archiving, or is it just only BIM?
So the question is, for cloud systems, does DIA require archiving or periodically or at the end? Up until very recently, there were no permitted cloud systems officially at DIA because of security issues and IT's own preferences. That is changing, but the policies on archiving for DIA internally are still in flux. On this particular project,
On this program, we had a little bit more luxury because we're housed outside the firewall. So, I mean, Buzzsaw archives daily, hourly, whatever it is, and then I know
Yeah.
the program management team has archived their copy over, and I'm sure that the design team has archived theirs over on a regular basis, and even at DIA, we received a copy from the Buzzsaw site, and I archived them over on a weekly basis as well. So the
Other than documents, so like for something like BIM 360 field,
yes.
would you archive the data periodically, or would you just hand it over at the end of the project?
Just hand it
That's
over the end of the project.
At the end,
Yeah.
because it's live until that point. Yeah.
I'm sure Field does archive things on its own, but there was no requirement for MHS to be archiving that information to DIA in some way.
Yeah, we didn't set up incremental deliverables of QA ledgers or commissioning ledgers or things like that. It's just in the activation process, we're going to go through all of this, and then at the end, we're going to be transferring that data set. Are we going to be assuring that the data is correct along the way? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean we need to.
We're going to wrap it up now. Please fill out your surveys if you get a chance. We'll be around if you have any other questions or want to chat. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.